Tonight, a legal win for Donald Trump. The U.S. Supreme Court rules he can't be banned from the ballot. A key ruling before Super Tuesday.
It was a very important decision, very well crafted.
Setting the stage for a repeat showdown. Concerns over the community spread of measles with more confirmed cases.
It's concerning.
A disturbing report on sexual violence during the Hamas attack as ceasefire talks continue.
A deal is on the table.
Plus, extreme degrees of winter, heavy snowfall versus unseasonal warmth.
This is going to be intense.
This is unbelievable.
And rolling through a new Wild West.
I opened up the blinds and this was on my front porch.
That awkward moment when tumbleweeds take over the town.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. The highest court in the United States has handed Donald Trump a major legal victory today, a win he's using to rally voters on the eve of a significant day on the path to the presidency. In a matter of hours, voters in 16 states and one U.S. territory, American Samoa, will vote on Super Tuesday, when the largest number of states will be holding primaries or caucuses, including Colorado. Today's Supreme Court ruling quashes a decision by Colorado's top court to disqualify Trump from the ballot. And that means efforts to ban Trump in Maine and Illinois will also end. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin starts us off.
When Colorado voters head to the polls Tuesday, Donald Trump will be on the ballot after the Supreme Court overruled Colorado's high court to disqualify him.
You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that.
A big win for the former president, who often calls the legal system rigged and corrupt. Colorado officials had argued Trump's actions over the Capitol attack and attempts to overturn the election.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol. We fight like hell.
Made him ineligible to ever run again, using a Civil War provision that bans anyone who is engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding federal office. But the justices disagreed, writing that states have no power under the Constitution to remove a federal candidate. Only Congress can, ending Colorado, Illinois, and Maine's attempt to ban Trump from the ballot.
States should be able, under our Constitution, to bar oath-breaking insurrectionists. Ultimately, it will be up to the American voters to save our democracy in November.
But the ruling didn't exonerate Trump. The justices sidestepped the insurrection question. Trump still faces criminal charges. His election interference case was supposed to start today. The court's timing delays it for months or even after the presidential election.
The court, in these indirect ways, is showing that it is tilting the playing field in support of the former president.
The court hears Trump's next argument in April that as president, he has absolute immunity from prosecution. With Super Tuesday and 1/3 of the votes up for grabs tomorrow, Trump's well on his way to clinching the Republican presidential nomination. Omar?
All right, Joy, thanks. And let's bring in CTV News political analyst Eric Ham now. Eric, Donald Trump is already the likely Republican nominee. So do you expect any surprises tomorrow?
No surprises, but we are going to be watching to see if Donald Trump can actually break his own ceiling of getting above 60 or 70%. We know that Nikki Haley has been winning about 30-40% of these Republican votes. Tomorrow's primaries, we will see about half of those states actually closed primaries. And so we'll be watching to see if Donald Trump can actually break out of that 60-70% and win a more dominant share into the 80s, 90s%.
Now, as we know, it takes considerable time and money to stay in a presidential race. And as far as Trump's challenger is concerned, you brought her up, Nikki Haley. What's her end game here?
Her end game, she's got the money to stay in this race for as long as she wants to. The end game is actually going to be the delegate math. There are about 1/3 of the total delegates available in tomorrow's Super Tuesday's races. Donald Trump is expected to win the lion's share. So it won't be money that's going to get Nikki Haley out of this race. It's going to be the math that simply is working against her. She needs 1,215 delegates to win the nomination. Donald Trump is going to win the lion's share of those tomorrow and will probably clinch next week. That will leave Nikki Haley no choice but to stand down.
How long does she stay in?
I think this race is over after March 12th when we see more states actually voting, and there just won't be enough delegates for Nikki Haley to actually secure the actual nomination.
All right, Eric Ham in Washington, thank you. Back in this country tonight, urgent new warnings about the spread of measles. The number of cases in Canada is now up to 17, 10 in Quebec, 5 in Ontario, and 1 each in BC and Saskatchewan. Even a small number of cases can multiply rapidly, and that's why health officials are urging parents to vaccinate their children, especially if they're traveling during spring break. Here's CTV's Heather Butts.
Highly contagious and on the move, measles is making a comeback, and health officials are pointing to a 2-dose solution.
The question is to be or not to be vaccinated. If you are, no problem. If you're not, you're taking a risk.
That risk now a growing concern, with at least 17 cases confirmed nationwide this year compared to a dozen in all of last year. Symptoms can be similar to those of a cold or flu before a rash appears, but it can lead to severe illness in some children, including pneumonia and swelling of the brain.
There are enough complications and worries that what you want is for your child not to catch measles.
With March break approaching, Canadians are being urged to be careful with social contacts and check their vaccine status before traveling. The airborne disease spreads through coughing and sneezing.
It's highly contagious. If you put one person with measles infection in a room with 100 people who are not vaccinated and susceptible, then 90 of those 100 will end up with the infection.
There are 10 cases in Quebec alone, almost all involving children, and making Montreal the country's epicenter, where some schools in the city have a vaccination rate as low as 40 to 50% in young kids.
Vaccinating their child is not just helping their child, but it's helping other children whose immune systems are not strong enough.
In Quebec, health officials are planning to hold vaccination campaigns at specific schools, but that's not until after the March break. Medical experts right across this country are urging everyone to be cautious and update their vaccines to help stop this spread. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. A UN report released today found that there are, quote, reasonable grounds that Hamas committed rape and sexual torture during the October 7th attack, and that the violence may be ongoing. The UN team that reported on the findings also said they heard of sexual violence against Palestinians, implicating Israeli forces and settlers. The White House tonight is again turning up the pressure for a ceasefire. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver reports.
The devastation in Gaza is mounting, as is the pressure on Israel and Hamas to strike a ceasefire deal. We are calling on the U.S. and international community to end the war, this Gazan says. In D.C. today, U.S. leaders met with Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, a visit opposed by his political rival, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
He has a critical voice in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. He's an important figure in the sitting government of Israel, and so that's why we engage him.
Progress towards a ceasefire is reportedly being made in Cairo, where officials are meeting. But Israel didn't send a representative over lingering questions about hostages.
It's really this element with the Israelis asking for really the first part of this agreement to be put in place, for Hamas to actually give the names and verify that they actually have some of these hostages that are still alive.
The U.S. is pushing for a ceasefire, as is Canada. On Saturday, those angry with Canada's response protested outside the Ontario Art Gallery, where an event with the Prime Minister and Italy's Prime Minister was scheduled.
Canada's complicit in this, and that's why we're here today. We want Canada to end all ties with Israel.
Invited guests say the protesters blocked entrance and exits to the venue, and the event had to be canceled.
By the time they snuck us to the side door, these protesters, found us and rushed the door at the same time. Somebody in my party got hit in the face on the way in. And then when we got in, we were in lockdown.
Toronto police say it was prepared to provide secure access for the Prime Minister into the venue, but ultimately the Prime Minister's team decided not to proceed. The RCMP, who are in charge of the Prime Minister's security, say due to several factors, including the size and volatile nature of the crowds at the entrance to the venue, it was not safe to move both Prime Ministers.
The ball got dropped somewhere, I believe.
Toronto police are investigating Saturday's events and say they're not ruling out any charges. Omar?
All right, Annie, thank you. To another conflict now and the state of emergency in Haiti after an explosion of violence. Gangs took over 2 prisons that led to the release of around 4,000 inmates. The army now surrounds the airport in the capital of Port-au-Prince, where gang leaders seeking to overthrow the country's prime minister have seized control. A nighttime curfew has been imposed as authorities attempt to restore order. No end in sight for the teachers' job action in Saskatchewan, where thousands hit the picket line.
Disheartening because we don't feel like we're being listened to.
Striking educators braved cold temperatures while marching outside the legislature this morning, interrupting the first day of the spring session. The Teachers Federation and the province have been in a bargaining deadlock for months over a new contract. A dangerous and severe weather system is sweeping across Western Canada, shutting down schools and highways, bringing warnings of heavy snowfall and extreme cold. And it's having the opposite effect elsewhere in the country. CTV's Heather Wright explains.
Much of Saskatchewan is covered in a thick blanket of snow today. People digging out after as much as 40 centimeters fell on some parts of the province in just 48 hours.
So it took me like an hour and a half to clean there, and I'm trying to clean this area.
Schools were closed today in many parts, including Saskatoon. The city asking people to stay home if possible, so crews could clear the roads.
We aren't scheduled or forecasted to receive any more snow today, so that means the cleanup can really start in earnest. But it's going to be cold.
Alberta is also dealing with extreme cold, with temperatures expected to reach -40 with the wind chill in some areas. In British Columbia, 117 centimeters of snow has fallen at Whistler Blackcomb in the last week, leading to high avalanche danger. 8 people called search and rescue on the weekend, all of them eventually able to get out with the help of a navigation app. It's a stark contrast to Eastern Canada, where some are wearing shorts. Toronto broke a 50-year-old temperature record this afternoon, hitting a high of 16 degrees Celsius.
This is fabulous. In a way it's good, in a way it's not. It's kind of scary because it shouldn't be this way.
While there have been periods of severe weather across the country, many parts have experienced a more mild than normal winter due to El Nino, leading to some golf courses recording their earliest opening day ever.
This is unbelievable that we're out this early in the spring.
The low-pressure system that brought snow and cold to Western Canada is the same system responsible for unseasonably warm temperatures in southern Ontario and southern Quebec.
This low-pressure system is affecting most of the country, but in very different ways.
While it was unseasonably warm here in southern Ontario today, a cool down is expected later this week. Environment Canada quick to point out winter is not yet over. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. South of the border, a new storm is slamming the west coast tonight following a massive blizzard over the weekend. Ski resorts buried under more than 3 meters of snow are digging out after a powerful blizzard barreled through parts of California, Nevada, and Utah. Major roads and highways have started to reopen, but the new system is expected to dump as much as half a meter of snow in Northern California. This comes as firefighters continue to battle deadly wildfires that have killed 2 people in Texas. Hundreds of homes and buildings have been destroyed. Canada's finance minister revealed today the federal budget will be released on April 16th. CTV's chief political correspondent Vashi Kapelos joins us now. And Vashi, the opposition accuses the Liberals of being out of touch on affordability. How will the budget address that?
Hi, Omar. The opposition has claimed exactly that, and it's been a remarkably successful message politically speaking, particularly for the Conservatives. To be fair, since last summer, the government has introduced a bunch of new measures related to increasing housing supply, but that stuff will take years to have an impact, both from a policy and political perspective. Things get even more complicated for the government because of new fiscal guardrails announced in the fall that will limit, bottom line, the size of the deficit going forward, and by extension, you'd assume the amount of big spending or new programs to address affordability. The one thing the feds have going for them, a rate of inflation that is edging ever so slightly down. That should make life a bit more affordable for Canadians, but in all reality, it'll take a really long time before it actually feels that way. And certainly things aren't going to get magically better before the budget in the next 6 weeks. So the pressure will remain on the government from both Canadians and the opposition to do more to address the cost of living crisis. Omar?
And once again, we'll see what's in the financial blueprint on Budget Day, April 16th. All right, Bashi, thank you. 61 organizations that govern amateur sports across the country are concerned about their financial futures tonight and are in need of urgent government funding. That's according to a new report coming out tomorrow. But TSN senior correspondent Rick Westhead has the details tonight. And Rick, how much of a cash injection are we looking at here? What exactly is the shortfall?
Well, interesting. You know, federal funding, federal core funding for amateur sports in Canada has not changed since 2005. So you've seen some national sport organizations have to furlough staff in the last years because, of course, over the last 20 years, expenses for travel, for hotel, for logistics, for coaching have obviously increased. So the Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Committee wanted to know just a clearer picture so they could go to the federal government with data. And they say that this report written by Deloitte suggests that they need $104 million worth of new funding every year to stay afloat.
And if the financial outlook stays the same, if nothing changes, what's the worst case scenario? What are you hearing?
Well, they say that they're in peril, these organizations. I talked to Canada Basketball's chief executive, Michael Bartlett, about this. You know, we have this dream team scenario right now where Canadian NBA stars like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray are going to go and compete for Canada in Paris at the Olympics this summer. However, if the federal government doesn't, you know, at least keep pace with inflation and add new funding, Bartlett told me that it's questionable whether Canada Basketball is going to be able to afford to have NBA players play in the next Olympic Games in 2028 in Los Angeles.
All right, lots to think about, and we'll see if there is a response from the federal government. Rick, thank you for this tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Coming up, leveling the playing field.
There's blatant overt racism while playing sport.
Tackling discrimination in sport. Plus, Hot Wheels, a decades-old stolen Ferrari finally found. Football player Jason Kelce reflected on his unbreakable bond with brother Travis during a tearful retirement speech.
We'll see how long this lasts. Stepping on the field was the most alive and free I had ever felt. I could hit somebody, run around like a crazed lunatic, and then get told, good job. I loved football. Whether it was in my backyard with my brother.
An emotional embrace between the brothers. Jason spent his entire 13-year NFL career with the Philadelphia Eagles, punctuated by a Super Bowl triumph in 2018. A troubling new snapshot is shedding light on an uneven racial playing field through the lens of Canadian sports. Here's CTV's Colton Prail on stick handling, the pervasive problem.
3 years after Akeem Alou blew the whistle on racism in hockey, progress has been slow.
Some people are scared enough in these leagues that have control to do the bare minimum, but we still haven't got to a place where we really got people's minds and hearts opened up to real change.
A new report from Statistics Canada shows nearly 1 in 5 Canadians say they've experienced or witnessed acts of racism and discrimination in sports. Alou says it shows how little things have changed since he was victimized by his former NHL coach.
Sometimes you sit there and you blame yourself. Maybe I should have been called the N-word, right? Like crazy things go through your mind.
But the incident spread far beyond NHL ice, even past athletes themselves. The report found spectators were more likely to be victims of discrimination or racism, something former professional women's hockey player Soroya Tinker is familiar with.
So in that sense, my mom would even hear a lot of the things that were said around her when people didn't realize that I was her daughter.
Racism was the most common form of discrimination experienced, as were attacks based on gender or sexual orientation. Oftentimes, abuse was verbal, with nearly half of all reported incidents involving insults or name-calling. Threats and harassment and physical assaults occurred at a lesser degree. Advocates say victims are often relying on resolutions from the same sporting organizations in charge of the environment where they were abused.
So we need to make sure that we have an independent third party that is experienced in sport matters and that has the right type of representation and inclusive representation.
Critics say too often complaints are being registered but not properly dealt with by provincial and national sporting bodies. They're pushing for more concrete consequences or funding cuts for those who don't comply. Omar.
All right, Colton, thanks. Still ahead, a luxury race car found decades after it was stolen. France has become the first country to enshrine the right to abortion in its constitution. People gathered in front of the Eiffel Tower to celebrate. The words "My body, my choice" were projected on the tower as demonstrators cheered and danced. Two major cases involving tech giant Apple have reached a conclusion today. Here in Canada, the BC Supreme Court approved a $14.4 million class action settlement over claims Apple provided iPhone 6 and 7 users with software updates that deliberately slowed devices. It comes on the same day the European Union fined the tech giant $2.7 billion for preventing music streaming providers like Spotify from telling Apple's App Store customers how to get the same subscription for less outside the App Store. Nearly 29 years ago, Formula One driver Gerhard Berger chased down his Ferrari as the thief drove it into the distance at the Grand Prix in Italy. Today, the long-lost luxury car was recovered by police in the United Kingdom. Ferrari alerted the Met of an imminent sale of the car to a U.S. buyer through a UK broker. Police swooped in, and here it is, painted red and in prime condition. After the break, the unwanted guests rolling into parts of the U.S. Earlier, we showed you two dramatically different weather pictures in Canada, but there is a really unexpected situation in Utah where tumbleweeds are taking over. A routine bike ride turned into an adventure for two kids dodging the rolling weeds as best they could. They seemed to fare better than this tow truck, which was completely covered as it tried to plow through. Anything not moving got covered, with the prickly plants stacking up a meter high or more in some yards.
I don't know.
John Young was surprised to find his home had become an attraction.
You take pictures, you take videos, and you hope the wind changes. I opened up the blinds, and this was on my front porch.
Officials say this is part of the fallout from the windy weather that's been hitting the West Coast. And it surprised Stan Romero when he opened his garage.
Boom, it was 10 foot high, you know, coming in the garage. Oh, close that door.
It seems there's really only one thing to do.
What do? You just laugh. There's nothing to do but laugh.
And that's a snapshot of this Monday. For all of us at CTV National News, good night.